You probably didn't notice when it started. A gaming rig that cost $1,500 last year now runs closer to $1,800. The laptop you had bookmarked jumped 40 bucks overnight. Your friend building a PC complained that DDR5 modules doubled in 3 months. And if you went looking for answers, you found the usual suspects: supply chain issues, trade tensions, demand from AI data centers. All technically true, none of them the actual story. Because while everyone was watching chip shortages and tariff wars, something fundamental broke in the RAM market. Not broke like a disaster, broke like a machine working exactly as designed, just not for you. Let me show you what I mean. On the surface, RAM pricing seems simple. Manufacturers make memory chips. Demand goes up, prices go up. Demand falls, prices drop. Economics 101. Except RAM doesn't follow those rules. It never really has. Here's what actually happened in the last 18 months. Between mid-2023 and early 2024, DDR4 prices fell off a cliff. We're talking 60% drops. High-end DDR5 kits that launched at $300 were selling for under $200. Retailers were practically giving the stuff away. Gamers and PC builders had a field day. Then, in late 2024, everything reversed. Not gradually, violently. Prices shot up 30, 40, sometimes 50% in a matter of weeks, and they're still climbing. The weird part? This isn't a supply problem, not in the traditional sense. To understand what's happening, you need to understand who makes RAM. And I don't mean the brands on the box, I mean who actually manufactures the chips inside. 3 companies control roughly 95% of global DRAM production: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. That's it. 3 corporations. If you're buying Corsair, G-Skill, Kingston, Crucial, doesn't matter. The chips came from one of those 3. Now, oligopolies aren't inherently evil, but they create incentives normal markets don't have. When only 3 players control an entire industry, competition stops being about price. It becomes about coordination. Here's how it works. When RAM prices collapse, these manufacturers don't just lose profit, they lose billions. In 2023, Samsung's chip division posted an operating loss of over $14 billion. SK Hynix lost roughly $4.5 billion. Micron saw its revenue cut in half. Their solution wasn't to innovate faster or cut costs. It was simpler. They cut production. In late 2023 and early 2024, all 3 companies announced they were reducing DRAM output. Samsung called it adjusting supply to market conditions. SK Hynix said it was optimizing production efficiency. Micron framed it as disciplined capital allocation. Corporate speak for the same thing: make less, charge more. And it worked. By mid-2024, inventories tightened, prices stabilized, then started climbing. Manufacturers went from historic losses to record profits in under a year. Samsung's chip division swung from a $14 billion loss to a $6 billion profit. SK Hynix posted its best quarterly earnings in company history. You might be thinking, okay, that's capitalism. Companies protect their margins. Fair enough. Except there's a second layer to this. Because while consumer RAM prices were spiking, something else was happening. AI was eating memory. The explosion of generative AI didn't just create demand for GPUs, it created insane demand for high-bandwidth memory, the kind used in data centers running large language models, image generation, and training algorithms that require terabytes of fast, accessible RAM. Companies like NVIDIA, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft started placing orders for HBM, or high-bandwidth memory, in volumes the industry had never seen. We're talking contracts worth tens of billions of dollars. And here's the kicker. HBM uses the same manufacturing capacity as the DDR4 and DDR5 in your computer. Same fabs, same equipment, same production lines. So now you've got Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron with a choice. Do they make consumer RAM that sells for $50 a module, or do they make HBM that sells to hyperscalers for $500 a unit with guaranteed multi-year contracts? Not a hard decision.
By late 2024, the shift was obvious. SK Hynix announced it was reallocating 30% of its DRAM capacity to HBM. Samsung followed with similar moves. Micron started prioritizing long-term supply agreements with cloud providers and AI infrastructure companies. Consumer RAM wasn't abandoned, it just became the secondary product, the thing they make when there's capacity left over, which there isn't much of anymore. And this is where the math gets uncomfortable, because demand for consumer RAM hasn't disappeared. Gaming isn't dead. Laptops still need memory. Workstations, servers, industrial applications, they all still exist, but the supply available to that market is shrinking, while the total production capacity is being redirected. What you get is a squeeze, not an accident, a reallocation. Let's talk about numbers for a second. In 2023, global DRAM revenue was $57 billion. By the end of 2024, analysts projected it would hit $85 billion. That's a 49% jump in 1 year. But here's what matters. Almost all of that growth came from HBM and server memory. Consumer DRAM revenue actually stayed flat or declined slightly in volume, while prices surged. Translation? You're paying more for less availability, while manufacturers are making record profits selling to someone else. It's not a conspiracy, it's just business. The AI boom created a customer willing to pay more for the same production capacity, so the manufacturers followed the money, and there's no reason for them to stop. Now, you might think competition would fix this, new manufacturers entering the market, undercutting the big three, balancing things out. Except, building a DRAM fab costs somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. The technology is viciously complex. The barriers to entry are astronomical. China's tried. They've poured state funding into domestic memory production for years, and they've made progress, but they're still generations behind in cutting-edge nodes. Their chips work, but they're not competitive at the high end where the real margins are. So the oligopoly remains and prices remain. There was a brief hope in mid-2024 that DDR5 adoption would ease things, more production capacity coming online, newer nodes, economies of scale kicking in. It didn't happen, because that new capacity got absorbed by HBM demand before it ever touched consumer markets. The irony is almost beautiful. The same AI revolution that's supposed to make everything faster and smarter is making your next RAM upgrade more expensive. Here's where it gets worse. This isn't temporary. AI infrastructure isn't slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, they're all racing to build bigger models, which need bigger clusters, which need exponentially more memory. Investment in AI data centers is projected to exceed $200 billion globally over the next 3 years. Every dollar of that investment increases competition for DRAM capacity. Meanwhile, consumer demand isn't evaporating. Windows 11 requires more RAM. Modern games are shipping with 16 gigabytes as a minimum recommendation. Video editing, 3D rendering, software development, all of it needs more memory than ever. So you've got rising baseline demand in the consumer space, colliding with explosive demand in the enterprise and AI space, all fighting over the same production capacity controlled by 3 companies who've already proven they'll cut supply to protect margins. The result? Prices stay high or go higher. Some analysts think we'll see relief in late 2025 or 2026. Maybe, but that assumes those new fabs aren't immediately allocated to HBM production, which they probably will be. There's also talk of alternative memory technologies, new architectures that could bypass DRAM entirely, but those are years away from commercial viability if they ever get there. In the meantime, the market operates under a simple rule. If you want RAM, you pay what they're asking. And what they're asking is more than it was 6 months ago, more than it was last year, probably more than it'll be next month. So, what does this mean for you? If you're building a PC, factor in that RAM is no longer the cheap part. Budget accordingly. If you're waiting for prices to drop back to 2023 levels, don't hold your breath. If you're watching this as an investor, understand that DRAM manufacturers are in an incredibly strong position. They've managed to turn a catastrophic loss cycle into record profitability in under 2 years, and the secular tailwinds from AI give them pricing power that could last half a decade. If you're just someone trying to understand why everything feels more expensive, here's the uncomfortable answer. You're not the priority anymore. The money is in the data center, the future is in AI, and consumer RAM is just what gets made when there's time left over, which there isn't much of anymore. There's a question worth sitting with. What happens when the infrastructure of the future makes the basics of the present unaffordable? When the same technology that promises to revolutionize everything quietly prices regular people out of the components they need to participate? It's already happening, not just with RAM, with GPUs, with specialized chips, with entire categories of hardware that used to be accessible and now are luxury goods. Maybe that's just progress. Maybe it's a temporary distortion that'll correct itself. Or maybe we're watching a market realize it doesn't need to serve everyone anymore, just the ones who can pay. The RAM on your motherboard doesn't care. It just does what it's told. But the price you paid